At the family dinner, Dad said, "You'll never be half the man your uncle was," then raised his glass to toast him. I just smiled, looked at Uncle Mark, and said, "Too bad you're toasting the guy who tried to blackmail me for $200,000. Silence fell, and Mark dropped his fork mid-bite. If there's ever a moment that replays in my head over and over again, it's that one. A long table surrounded by familiar faces, faces that never saw me as more than the family disappointment, and then silence so loud it swallowed the room whole. My father caught mid-toast, his mouth still half open in smug pride. My Uncle Mark, red creeping up his neck like a thermometer in July. And the rest of the Davenport clan, frozen like they'd just heard the start of a scandal that would finally rip through the pristine image they worked so hard to polish. What came after was chaos. But in that single moment, I felt nothing but calm. Because I'd been waiting for this. This wasn't some outburst or act of defiance. No, this was planned. Every word, every beat, every stare across that oak table in my father's grand dining room in Simsbury, Connecticut. They always thought I was soft. That I was the failed writer who couldn't keep a marriage, couldn't hold a real job, and would never measure up to my uncle, the great Mark Davenport, the financial wizard. But secrets have a way of bubbling up. And when one of those secrets tried to extort me for $200,000, I didn't fold. I listened. I followed the trail. And I waited until I had enough to shatter the illusion. It just so happened that the perfect opportunity came during the one night my father decided to once again humiliate me in front of everyone. It had started like every other important family dinner in that house, long-winded invitations sent by my father's secretary, an implicit dress code, and expectations of punctuality, perfect manners, and passive-aggressive chatter. My father, Martin Davenport, always made sure to host these things like they were galas. He never just had dinner, he curated it. Caterers, wine pairings, valet in the circular driveway, the whole 9 yards. It was his chance to show off. Not just wealth, but family. The perfect Davenport image. I was surprised I was even invited. I'd moved out of the family spotlight long ago, after my divorce, after I stopped pretending I gave a damn about being part of the family business. I made my living writing essays, ghostwriting bios, editing when I had to. Not glamorous, but I was good at it. And I was happy staying out of politics. Or, at least I thought I was. The house looked the same that night. A little older, maybe. The paint on the shutters was beginning to flake, and the fountain out front wasn't running, though it was usually one of Dad's pride pieces. Inside, the air was thick with expensive cologne and the scent of roast duck. I was shown to the dining room by one of the catering staff, and the table was already set, long, polished, and so overdone it looked like it belonged in a museum. Most of the family was already seated. My brother Colin, with his wife Teresa, whispering something as they eyed me. Cousins, in-laws, business partners my father called family. And, of course, at the far end of the table, seated beside my father, was Uncle Mark. I hadn't spoken directly to Mark in almost a year. Not since the blackmail attempt that came with a message threatening to go public with supposed tax fraud is committed. Total BS, of course. But it was the kind of thing that, even if untrue, could ruin someone's career in journalism. Especially someone like me, who freelanced for publications that actually did their homework. I didn't go to the police immediately. There was no name, no clear threat, just a demand for money. But I knew the voice. Distorted, but still Mark's cadence. And then the follow-up email sealed it. He tried to cover it up, of course. Layers of shell companies, IP addresses bouncing across continents. But I wasn't just a writer. I knew how to dig. I had contacts, sources, friends in digital forensics. And I started building a case, quietly, until I had something solid, something undeniable. But tonight wasn't about legal action. Not yet. Tonight was about truth. Family truth. The meal went as expected at first. Forced smiles. "How's the writing, Neil?" from people who couldn't name a single thing I'd ever published. My father occasionally glanced down at the table at me, no doubt mentally listing all the things I wasn't. And Mark? He was cool as ever. Buttoned up, smug, sipping a 2004 Bordeaux like it was water. Then came the toast. My father stood. His voice had that performative warmth he used when he knew people were watching. Before dessert is served, I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone who's been more than just family to me. He turned to Mark and raised his glass. My brother Mark has been a mentor, a leader, a visionary. He built something out of nothing and has given back more than anyone here realizes. I'm proud to call him my brother. And, frankly, his eyes met mine. I only wish my own son had inherited a bit of that grit, that drive. Maybe one day, Neil, you'll become half the man your uncle is. I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse. My glass was already in my hand. I stood slowly. Everyone turned to look. I'm glad you said that, I said, calmly, because it gives me the perfect segue. I looked directly at Mark. Too bad you're toasting the guy who tried to blackmail me for 200 grand. It landed like a cannon. Mark's fork dropped before his expression even changed. The clatter echoed down the table. My father looked from me to Mark like he hadn't heard correctly. I didn't sit down. In case anyone's interested, I continued, I have voice recordings, metadata from the emails, a full report from an analyst who traced the offshore accounts used to send the threat, and a witness. Several, actually. The silence was the kind you don't recover from. Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came. His wife, Jocelyn, leaned away from him slightly like something had just crawled out of his collar. You're lying, he muttered, low and shaky. I smiled. Then maybe you should explain the connection between Halvern Financial Holdings and your former assistant's testimony, because she didn't seem to think I was lying. That was when the murmurs started. Colin looked stunned. Teresa was already whispering to someone. My father was pale. Mark stood, his chair screeching against the polished floor. You little piece of sit down, I said quietly. You're only going to make it worse. He didn't. He turned and left the room, nearly tripping over the server bringing out coffee. My father didn't speak for the rest of the meal, but the silence said everything. The air in the room stayed frozen long after Mark disappeared down the hall. The clinking of silverware, the rustling of napkins, everything stopped. My father, still standing with his glass in hand, lowered it slowly like someone realizing too late that the spotlight had shifted, and he was standing center stage without his lines memorized. I didn't sit. Not yet. I wanted them to feel it, every single one of them. For once, the attention wasn't on how disappointing I was or how little I'd accomplished compared to the rest of them. It was the truth. Something this family had never been too comfortable with. You're making a scene, my cousin Troy finally said from across the table. He was always the peacemaker, the reasonable, one who'd grown up practicing Dad's tone of voice like it was a family heirloom. No, Mark made a scene the moment he sent a veiled threat through an offshore front company and demanded a payoff, I said, calmly. I'm just the guy who finally said it out loud. My father cleared his throat. Neil, he began, his voice more gravel than usual. This isn't the time or the place. When would have been the right time, Dad? I cut in, keeping my eyes on him. When you compared me to him for the 100th time? Or the 1000th? When you stood there and told the whole table I'd never measure up to a man who built his empire on manipulation and lies. His jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might say something. Something meaningful. But instead, he did what he always did, deflected. This is a private family matter. You had no right to bring it up like this. No, what I didn't have, I said slowly, was support. For years. I let it go when you dismissed what I did for a living. I let it go when you told everyone my divorce was my fault without asking what really happened. I let it go when you paraded Mark around like some savior, knowing damn well something was off. But when he tried to ruin my life for money, that's where it ended. And if you think I'm going to protect him the way you always have, you don't know me at all. No one dared interrupt. A few of my younger cousins looked like they didn't even know how to react. I could see Colin shifting uncomfortably. He was always a yes man to Dad, but not a total idiot. He'd heard rumors about Mark before. We all had. The difference was, I hadn't ignored them. I have a file, I said, lowering my voice slightly. It's timestamped, cross-referenced, and already with someone who can do something about it. I didn't want it to come to this, but I won't be intimidated by anyone, family or not. I need some air, my Aunt Patrice mumbled and pushed her chair back. She left her dessert untouched. The room remained heavy. I finally sat down, picked up my napkin, wiped my hands. No one touched the coffee that had been served. The thing about truth is it doesn't always spark outrage. Sometimes it just hangs in the room like smoke. Suffocating, lingering, unavoidable. Teresa leaned toward Colin and whispered something. He shook his head slightly and kept his eyes down. Troy, surprisingly, was the first to speak again. If you have proof. I mean, real proof, what are you going to do? I've already done it, I said. The ball's rolling. That answer seemed to rattle a few of them. I could tell some were already thinking about how this would affect their jobs, their reputations, their dinner invitations. But none of that mattered to me. I turned my gaze back to my father, who had finally sat down, both hands on the table like he was bracing for an earthquake. You can still say something, I offered. Even now. You could say, "I'm sorry this happened to you." Or maybe just, "I didn't know." Anything. He didn't. Instead, he looked away. Not with shame. With annoyance. And in that moment, I realized what I had known all along. He hadn't just been blind to Mark's corruption. He'd ignored it. Tolerated. Maybe even admired it. The server came in to clear the plates, moving gingerly like she didn't want to disturb a crime scene. Aunt Margot finally broke the silence with a half-hearted attempt at conversation, asking Colin about his new car. But it felt forced. Everyone knew the evening had changed direction completely. I sat back, letting the noise return in fits and starts. A few whispers here, some awkward laughs there. Nobody looked me in the eye, except for Jocelyn. Mark's wife had stayed seated through the whole thing, saying nothing. But now, she was staring at me with this strange expression, like she'd known, but didn't know what to do with it. "You had to do it like this?" she finally asked. I nodded. It was the only way anyone would believe me. She didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. Someone tried to offer more coffee, and I politely declined. My appetite was gone. I thought about what would happen next. The fallout. The inevitable damage control. The phone calls, the denials, maybe even legal threats. But the truth was out now. It was real. It was mine. And no matter how they spun it, or who they tried to blame, it wasn't going back in the box. Jocelyn didn't say another word. She just looked at me for a moment longer, as if she was deciding which side of the story she was going to fall on. Then she stood up, walked around the table without so much as excusing herself, and left the room in the same direction Mark had gone. That, more than anything, confirmed what I had suspected she knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough to make the silence speak volumes. The rest of the dinner wound down in strained silence and half-hearted murmurs. Some cousins tried to pretend it didn't happen. Others just got up and left early. One of the family friends, Mr. Dellinger, I think, gave me a quick nod on the way out, like a quiet acknowledgement of everything that had been unspoken all these years. My father didn't look at me again. I didn't stick around to say goodbyes. I gathered my coat, nodded to the staff on my way out, and stepped into the cold evening air. The house behind me was lit like a stage set, elegant and hollow. I could hear the wind whistling through the trees along the driveway as I walked to my car. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not vindicated yet, but free. The next morning, the story broke. I didn't need to do anything else. I'd already handed off the full file to a friend of mine, Allison McNally, an investigative reporter who didn't care about the last name Davenport. The article was front-page local news and quickly picked up by state and business outlets. Local investor accused of financial misconduct. Blackmail allegations surface in family feud. Mark's picture, his polished headshot in a tux from some gala, was splashed beside the headline. Beneath it, quotes from the report, a partial transcript of the voicemail, and even a statement from one of the assistants he'd tried to use to set up the shell companies. More people came forward. Turns out I wasn't the only one he tried to lean on. Not the only one he thought would stay quiet. My story gave them permission to speak. Within a week, several of Mark's companies were under review. A civil suit was filed by a former partner. Clients pulled out. The state finance board froze 2 of his business accounts, and his retirement was no longer a celebration, it was damage control. I didn't revel in it, not in a cartoonish, movie villain way, but I did feel something close to justice, and something even closer to peace. My father didn't call, not for a long time, not even when my name was mentioned in the articles as the whistleblower. Not even when the family's reputation began to take hits in the circles he cared so much about. I figured he'd just do what he always did, bury his feelings under pride and spin the narrative to protect his image. But then, one Saturday morning about 3 weeks after the story broke, I got a letter in the mail. Not a text, not an email, a handwritten letter. It was short. "Neil, I didn't know. I should have. I was wrong to say what I said. You were right to do what you did. Dad." No apology for the years of comparison. No sweeping confession of guilt. But those lines? That was more than I ever expected. And maybe it was enough. As for Mark, last I heard, he was negotiating a settlement behind closed doors. Jocelyn had moved out and filed for separation. He wasn't going to prison, and I didn't want that. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about truth. About stopping a man who used his power and reputation to hurt others. And about making sure I wasn't his next casualty. And the rest of the family? Some rallied around me in private. Some stayed quiet. That was fine. I didn't need their applause. What I needed, I already had, a life I'd built on my own terms. With honesty. with integrity, and with the kind of quiet strength they never knew I had because I never shouted about it. There's something satisfying about standing up for yourself, not in rage, not in pettiness, but in full knowledge of what is right, and doing it in front of the very people who thought they had you pegged, who thought your silence was weakness, that your kindness meant you couldn't strike back when it counted. I've learned something through all this. Revenge doesn't have to be cruel. It doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes, the most satisfying revenge is simply refusing to carry their shame anymore. Holding up the mirror, letting them see the truth, and walking away without needing to win their approval. So yeah, maybe I'll never be the man my uncle was. And thank God for that.